What's up, everybody? My name is Tim Ruswick, and today we're talking about how to make people play your game more often. Now, some people would call this making your game addicting. I don't like that term because I feel like addiction is a negative thing, and I feel like the actual thing that you should be designing for should be replayability, not so much an actual physical addiction that someone can't stop. So a little bit of dark side, a little bit of semantics, but I just wanted to share that. I want to talk about one of the concepts in a book that I read called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. This is a book that is mainly made for businesses and startups and those type of companies, but it applies to games. And I want to talk about one part of the model specifically in Hooked that I think is really, really interesting. If you want to buy this book, I have a link down in the description, and you can go through all 4 of the stages of how to build habit-forming products. But I'm only going to talk about the first one because I feel like it is the number one most overlooked thing in games. I feel like people forget about this so often. So the first part of the Hooked model, which I think you should build into your game if you want to actually, have people coming back to it and playing it often, is what's called a trigger. Now, when people want to build games that are, replayable, games that people play every day or every week or whatever it is, super often, usually they're focused on the gameplay. They're focused on what they can add to the game, the cool features, the cool stuff they're adding to the game. But what they forget about is reminding the player that they exist, right? The player has a life outside of your game. Maybe they're in a relationship, maybe they have kids, maybe they have a job. They're off doing their own thing, right? And your game is just sitting here on the internet waiting for them to play. But if they don't remember about it, if there's something doesn't trigger the interaction between them and their real life and doing whatever they're doing in your game, how are they gonna keep playing? Now, sometimes you can build games that are ridiculously addicting and people think about them all day and they're just like, oh, I can't wait to play that. And they'll come back to it. But that is not, I don't feel like that's designable. I think it's something you can create when you iterate a lot and you can kind of improve it over time. But I think more often than not, that's kind of discovered. It's kind of like, hey, we built this thing that just people love for whatever reason, or we did this thing, or we iterated 1,000 times and we got to a point where people keep coming back to it. But I feel like a more reliable way to actually get them to play your game over and over again is the trigger. And this assumes, of course, that your game is good. Your game has to be good for the triggers to work. If your game is bad, triggers are going to come off as spam, and they're going to be like, what? That game sucks. Why would I play that game? So triggers can take the form of many different things. The most common thing that we see would be emails and push notifications. Those are the most common form of triggers because they pop up in your face and they say, hey, remember that I exist? Now, I want to be clear, like a lot of mobile games do this, but a lot of mobile games do this wrong. And so I'll use a mobile game specifically as an example to show you kind of what a trigger is and kind of where we can go from there. But basically, I play this game called Clash Royale every once in a while. I'm not a super fan of it, but Nicole plays it a ton, so I end up playing it with her a lot. But basically, the game will, if I log in and I play it and then I log out, the game will send me a push notification a couple minutes later, and it'll say, hey, you forgot to unlock a chest if I didn't unlock a chest. And I'm like, oh, well, I did forget to unlock a chest, so let me go back and unlock the chest. And that's something cool to come back to, right? It's not saying, hey, play our game, play our game, play our game. It's saying, no, there's something cool for you. Why don't you go do that? Well, I log in, I go to unlock the chest, and then guess what? The chest takes 2 hours to play or to unlock, and I have to wait. And I'm like, oh, well, whatever. Okay. And then I'll wait, and then I'll get another push notification, and it'll say, your chest is ready. Open and get your shit. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And so I hit that. I open my chest. It's cool. It's a cool interaction to come back to, right? Because I get cool stuff. I get interesting stuff. But then there's only 4 spots on the game for chests. Chest 1, chest 2, chest 3, chest 4. And now that I have an open spot because I opened my chest, I can play again and I can get another chest. And then I do that, and then that whole loop will continue. If I log off without unlocking a chest, it'll remind me, hey, you forgot to unlock a chest. Once the chest is unlocked, it'll say, hey, come get your stuff, and then that whole loop repeats itself. But it starts with the trigger. Yes, I could play the game when in my free time whenever I wanted to. Yes, I can continue playing, but the rewards are locked and the system is set in a cycle. Now, you don't have to do this with push notifications, but if you're making a mobile game, this is probably the simplest, fastest way to do it. And you want to be really careful, because if you send out a push notification, for example, for something that's just not interesting or it's not fun, or like, hey, you haven't opened our game in a month, it comes off as like needy and like, what the fuck, and people just kind of swipe it away. So you want to make sure that when you do kind of trigger someone, they're coming back to do the core loop of your game, or they're coming back to do a really fun action. You don't want to greet them with, like, that's definitely not the time for an ad or something that's just going to stop their experience, because that's just shitty UX, in my opinion. But then the other way you can do it is like with emails or user accounts. You can trigger people. And sometimes, I should say this too, like, triggers aren't always controlled by you. Like, sometimes there are external triggers as well that are just subliminal. So for example, there was this commercial that I fucking hate, but it was this something general for car insurance or something like that, and it was like, for the best car insurance rates in town, call 1-800-GENERAL now. And the reason I remember that is because at the beginning of that, they put the sound of an alarm clock, a regular alarm clock. And oh my God, that pissed me off. Because after hearing that commercial multiple times, guess what happens every time I hear a damn alarm clock? Guess what happens every time I hear the guess? Just guess. That is a trigger, okay? That was intentionally designed all the way through to trigger that memory. And then of course I memorized the damn song, and now I know their phone number. I never called them, but you know, that's how the system works. So there are triggers outside of like direct response, push notifications, emails, and stuff like that. There are psychological triggers. You can associate, like, for example, my game is about a breakup. My game is about Philophobia is about a person that went through a really rough breakup, and they're experiencing the trauma and the grief of going through all that. I would imagine that once this is done, if someone owns my game and they go through a breakup, that is going to be somewhat of a trigger to play my game again, because it's relevant, it's contextually relevant. But there are also external triggers that are outside of like the subliminal realm too. People's friends can be triggers to play a game. For example, like, hey, I want to hang out with you. What game should we play? Oh, let's play this. And if it's something where they can talk really easily and join the game really easily, the ease of use and the simplification of it can actually be a trigger socially to kind of bring people together. So I want you to think in terms of triggers when you're thinking about making a game that people play over and over again. What is bringing them back? Like, what could be a thing that you could add that would make people play it more often? Like Spelunky, one of the cool things that Spelunky does is they have a daily challenge that they do. Like, yeah, Spelunky's a cool game. It's a randomly generated, procedurally generated game, and it's cool. You can play it on your own, but every day there's a new challenge. So that's kind of a trigger to log in and do the challenge, right? You want to get the stuff and just make it happen. So think in terms, don't just think in terms of like gameplay and like, how can I make this a fun game, but also think in terms of triggers. Like, how can I actually, once people start playing it, how can I keep them playing it? How can I get them to play it over and over again? What is in there? And the book kind of goes into more detail about what you do after the trigger, and there's some really important points in here. So I recommend you read the whole book, but I just want to talk specifically about triggers because I feel like that's the one thing that a lot of indie game developers get wrong. Like, it's the one thing that like people that know what they're doing, like Supercell, they get right. They understand triggers. They understand the whole process. They probably also have, clinical psychologists working with them to actually explore psychology and all that. But, they get it. A lot of game developers, indie game developers, don't really get it. They don't have triggers. They just try and make a fun game, which is great. You should make a fun game, but you also need something outside of that that's going to bring people back and remind them that you exist. So that's all I got for you. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on this. Let me know if there are any games out there that you feel like does triggers well. Mobile games, regular games, PC games, whatever it is. If there's a good example of triggers out there, leave it in the comments down below because I would love to hear about it. I would love to research it. But that's all I got. My name is Tim Ruswick, and I'll see you again tomorrow.